Halloween is upon us once again, my friends, and it's time for all of us YouTubers to do spooky-based content, followed quickly by us ignoring Thanksgiving and getting prepped up for Christmas time. Seriously though, with us getting to the time of tricks and treats, I decided to let y'all decide what we're doing for this All Hallows Eve, giving you some options for some old classics and things that I've never seen before when it comes to the holidays. And everyone decided that we're going to be going into the realms of parody today, as we look into the Mel Brooks classic from 1974, Young Frankenstein. And thus the start of many misspellings in this script when it comes to that name. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am your ever-friendly Pokeprof, and welcome back to Fascinating Fiction. Mel Brooks is an interesting figure when you look at his work. Having been in filmmaking of some kind since the 1950s, meaning he's been doing this for over 70 years at this point, Brooks' main claim to fame has always been making fun in light of things that most people would never otherwise touch. This all started with The Producers, a film that has two men trying to get rich quick by making a bomb stage production based off Hitler, only to fail when it turns out to be a smash hit. From there, he's gone through a long line of comedic and often irreverent movies that are considered by many to be cult classics, with the likes of Blazing Saddles, Spaceballs, and Robin Hood Men in Tights all usually immediately coming to mind. But Young Frankenstein is different in a lot of ways when compared to these movies, not just in structure and style, but who actually was the head behind most of this. We'll get to that once we delve a bit deeper into the history of the film, but for now, how about we get into things proper? And before we do that, now I'm fitting for the rest of the episode. So one of the more interesting things that has got to be said about this film starts off right at the beginning. You remember that age-old meme of the dramatic prairie dog? Yeah, the musical stinger that's used in that actually comes from this movie and is used several times, including right at the title drop. The actual movie starts with someone trying to take a box from the crypt keeper here. Emphasis on the word trying. This is one of the major aspects you'll have to get used to in any of Mel Brooks' films, the satire and comedy that comes with it. Depending on which movie, it's either completely zany or more tongue-in-cheek. The reason for such a different flow between films is because Brooks almost always wrote them together with at least one other writer. In this movie's case, he wasn't even the driving force behind it. Gene Wilder, a close friend and constant actor for Brooks, was the head writer and would actually go on to play the main lead. Wilder wanted this movie to have a bit more faithful and serious tones to relate to the original Frankenstein novels and movies that came before, which is why the tone of the film is a tad different from something like Blazing Saddles. In fact, they wanted to be so faithful that the lab equipment seen in the movie is actually from the original Frankenstein film. Getting back to the plot, turns out that the corpse here belongs to the original Dr. Frankenstein's father. With him gone, the castle and everything in it goes to the latest in the line, Dr. Frederick Frankenstein.
That's Frankenstein.
This is one of the major running gags throughout the film. You see, the classic Frankenstein movies, all of them, they happened, and Frederick here is wishing to keep a sizable distance between the horrors that his grandfather created and his own contribution to science. It's actually gotten to the point that he will loudly proclaim how you should pronounce his name and, if you push him, just what exactly he thinks about his grandfather's experiments.
My grandfather's work was doo-doo!
Even with that in mind though, he's still willing to go see the old estate. After saying goodbye to his fiancée in a rather oddly placed scene, one that's mostly there to serve as context for later, we get introduced to Igor, who after hearing Frederick's preference for Frankenstein, wishes to be called Igor for the rest of the film. And here's an interesting little behind the scenes thing that I actually find quite hilarious. A lot of what Igor does in the film was actually improvised by his actor, Marty Feldman. This includes a running gag of his hump switching sides between scenes, and even asking, "What hump?" whenever it's mentioned. Considering the fact that Wilder had originally wrote the part specifically for Feldman, it's quite fitting that he was able to embrace the character so easily. We're also introduced to another character, Inga, who will be Frederick's laboratory assistant. While I wouldn't necessarily call her eye candy for the film, this wouldn't be the first or last time a Brooks film will have a character who's all about her sexuality or wanting to go to bed with the main character. Usually both. Especially both if we're talking about the producers.
Sometimes I'm afraid of the lightning.
It's just an atmospheric discharge.
Fred, my man, that is not the discharge she's looking for. Upon getting introduced to another character in Frau Blücher, no, I'm not doing the horse joke, we see that the Frankenstein blood does indeed run deep within Frederick's character, a nightmare encouraging him to be a proper member of the family. This isn't helped by him and Inga finding a secret passageway that leads them down to the actual laboratory of the former doctor himself, including a book detailing just exactly what he did to create his famous monster. And upon reading it, Frederick has a shocking revelation about his grandfather's idea for reanimating dead tissue.
It could work!
Also, can we just say that Wilder had an amazing yelling and screaming voice? Turns out, according to the information they gathered, to successfully reanimate the dead and simplify the process, everything on the future monster will need to be greatly increased in size. Arms, legs, veins, you name it. Though Inga brings up this fact.
You would have an enormous Schwanzstücke. Oof.
After doing a bit of grave robbing to get the right body and a bit of brain robbing for the incorrect brain, begging the question of why Igor here is scared of his own reflection, we get to the whole kit and caboodle of making the monster proper, including the rising up to the top of the castle to zap the monster to life. For the moment though, it ends in failure. This is where we start leaving the bounds of just reenacting a lot of the classic Frankenstein moments, and actually start getting a bit more original. And a bit more in the way of Mel Brooks' normal style. You see, the local village doesn't really want another Frankenstein about, considering they've gone through the whole song and dance of the monster 5 times at this point. It takes a local inspector, one of the more crazy characters in the film, to convince them not to form an angry mob until they can confirm exactly what Frederick's goals are. Of course, right when the inspector comes to visit, the monster actually rises up and is very much a newborn baby, learning very slowly how to move and being frightened very easily. Oh, and for those who didn't know, that's Peter Boyle from Everyone Loves Raymond fame playing as the monster. Not only was this one of his big breakout roles in Hollywood, this is also where he actually met his wife, hilariously enough. After establishing a way to calm the monster, music soothes the savage beast, don't you know, we then get a couple of scenes that reference the other movies. What I find the most interesting here is how the second reference, the one with the old blind man, is taken right out of the original novel and twisted to just have the right amount of comedy. Actually, speaking about the book, that's the one major difference here that makes Frederick stand out from his grandpappy Victor. The fact that he is willing to take responsibility for his actions. One of the major driving points of the original novel, as pointed out so wonderfully by Red from Overly Sarcastic Productions in her own Halloween video, is the fact that Victor does everything and anything he can to avoid doing anything with the monster after he's born. Frederick, on the other hand, does the exact opposite, and does his best to contain the monster every time it escapes and causes havoc, while also doing his best to actually be a father figure to him.
Going to teach you. I'm going to show you how to walk, how to speak, how to move, how to think.
Being a man of science and still wanting notoriety for bringing the dead back to life, however, the good doctor here thinks it's a wonderful idea to show off the monster to the village. You know, the same people who have formed an angry mob at least 5 times already. Though I'll give him this, if there's one way to ensure you make people accept you, a song and dance number works wonders.
Where fashion sits.
Of course, complications arise and the monster is imprisoned. During this, Frederick's fiancée comes back into the plot for little reason, so you're forgiven if you had forgotten her entirely by this point. It does give the monster things to do, so he breaks free and kidnaps the fiancée, who apparently gets so scared of him in that initial scene that part of her hair turns white. Though let's be honest, we know what this is a reference to. There's only one real reason, though, that the monster wants her.
Oh my God. Woof.
I know this is a Mel Brooks film, and I know how some of his stuff is, but it's still weird for how serious this movie is at some points to be reminded just how horny it is. Thankfully, this doesn't last too long as Frederick and company use music to lure the monster once more to the castle. In an attempt to save the monster and let him be accepted by humanity, Frederick does an experiment that will give some of his mind to the creation. It works, and the monster actually gives a rather elegant speech about how Frederick never gave up on him and actually risks his own life to help his. The movie ends with the angry mob being cool with the monster, Frederick marrying his assistant, and the monster marrying Frederick's original fiancée. And this wouldn't be a Mel Brooks film if we didn't leave off on a really silly joke, as we find out just what Frederick got in return from the monster with that transfer of his brain. So let's be entirely honest, if you're watching this or any Mel Brooks film, you know at least something of what you're getting into. While I wouldn't exactly call any of his works highbrow, there's always been an element of love and respect in the humor that you don't find in a lot of parody or satire these days. For every single joke that young Frankenstein makes at the expense of the original movies and the Frankenstein story as a whole, there are also parts where the love and respect for the material is there, and it's always been where Brooks' works have shined the best. And I'll be honest, the thing that makes the movie the most interesting is just how serious some parts of it are. When you see something like Spaceballs or Robin Hood Men in Tights, the jokes and over-the-top nature of the films are so strong that you can't help but treat it as a full comedy. Young Frankenstein, for all of the off-the-wall things that it employs, retains some sense of story and connective elements to it that, in my honest opinion, make it perhaps one of the best of his films. Just, well, make sure everyone watching this realizes just how lewd it can be. Woof. And I think that about wraps things up for now. I wish you all a happy Halloween, and for those who voted for movies that we didn't look at, don't worry, I'll keep them in the back of my mind for next year. Who knows, maybe I'll finally get around to actually getting caught up on my schedule, and we'll have more than just one episode a month again. With all that said, I hope I've done a good job to entertain you, and I'll do my best to do so again in the future. Hopefully you'll follow along with my content by subscribing and doing all the other things that gives us YouTubers life. If you wish to support me a bit more, I do have a Patreon where you can get access to bonus content. But until next time, stay frosty.